Alright, today on the lift I have a 2013 JK Wrangler Unlimited. It's getting an Eaton E locker in the front 27 spline D30. We got some Amsoil gear oil and some limited slip additive for the rear that has a limited slip already in it. So it should be a nice clean install. Help this Jeep out a lot off-road. He's going to put some bigger tires and a lift kit on it eventually, but wants to get the drivetrain stuff wrapped up first. Looks good. Alright, let's do it. Drain out the rear def. Alright, we're ready to take off the unit bearing. You got a 36 mil nut, and don't ever try to take these wheel speed sensors out of a unit bearing. They never will come out. I've tried several times and it breaks 100% of the time. Just don't bother. If you need to remove this further than the wire allows, there's like 2 more little clips, a couple retainers, and there's a connector over there. Just unpop the connector and pull the whole wire harness off to remove the unit bearing. I'm just gonna move it out of the way and hang it up by the bungee cord off the coil and just be a little careful and leave it connected. But these do not come out. If they come out, then you gotta heat it with a torch, drill it out, and change the wheel speed sensor. And you might as well just buy a unit bearing with a wheel speed sensor already in it. But that was a fail of Jeep, that it needed anti-seize put on it. And anyway, let's get this thing apart and knock the other side apart too. Alright. Copper-headed sledge. Just give this a little couple taps. Easy. These axle shafts in the factory have these stupid little centering things to try to line it up. We're going to replace the inner axle seals with better ones that have cones, so you really don't need these, but save them if you want. Half the time they're smashed in there sideways from people not knowing what they're doing and jamming the axle shafts in, or they're full of mud like this one is a little bit. Sometimes they're stuck in there and you don't even know, but save them. I mean, I'll put them back on it. It does kind of help guide and center the shaft so you're not beating up the inner axle seal. But with the aftermarket seals, like I said, that we're putting in, they have a nice copper trumpet cone, or brass, whatever cone that guides it. But this axle shaft's in great shape. Feels good, so we'll put that back in as is, clean it up. Alright, I got both sides taken apart. Diff is drained and pulled the cover off. And first thing you want to do, obviously inspect it, make sure there's no gear set damage or anything, because we're going to end up using that, but everything looks good. First thing you want to do is grab a dial indicator and a magnetic base and just observe the current backlash of the setup, because basically we're not trying to do a full master install gear setup here. We're just trying to swap that Eaton E locker in and get the same setup that we have now. So factory spec for a JK Dana 30 is 6 to 10 thousandths backlash, and this one, I did check it, but let's see. It's kind of hard to do with one hand without holding the drive shaft, but this one I checked and it's actually at 7 thousandths, so it's right in the middle, perfect, you know, factory setup like you would expect on a new Jeep. So we're gonna swap carriers and get that same setup and we'll be good to go. You always want to keep track of orientation and left to right, up and down, where the bearing caps go. That's important because that's how the axle was machined. You want them the same so the bearings get the proper loading. Pop this guy out. You also want to kind of take note of the amount of preload. That one actually kind of felt loose. I wouldn't mind going a little tighter when I install it. These are used bearings. We're going to change out these axle seals, so we yank those out. These are the factory original kind that have a part that presses in and then a part that spins on the inside. But see, there's no protection when the axle shaft tries to jam into here. The aftermarket ones have a trumpet cone, a guide cone. They're much better. Get a brake clean those bores out. So these are the coned axle seals. See, they got a nice taper, so when the axle comes in, it guides it right in. This is a seal installer that I made years ago. Just fits in there. The other little trick I have, take an old claw hammer, cut the claw off, and then you get a lot more room for a good swing, you know, to kind of cap this in. They make lots of fancy seal installers and all kinds of threaded shenanigans, but I've always just done it like this. It's fine. And I put RTV on these too to seal them. So let's get those installed. Seal straight, clean up the RTV and do the other side. You also want to check you didn't mess up the spring on the seal. It did have one Jeep that the spring was either missing or I screwed up, or it did come back, and that little tiny spring was gone. So you always want to check that the seal's in good shape after you're done pounding on it. Looks good. Alright, seals look nice and straight. You can see both our springs are good, so that's done. Let's get new carrier bearings on the new locker. We'll clean this up real quick too before we start putting new parts in. Alright, we're going to swap over the ring gear to this new Eaton E locker and install new bearings. and lock the ring gear bolts down. A couple tips here: don't get ahead of yourself and just pound the bearings on. You need to remove this guy in order to get the ring gear on, I believe. So you got to be real careful. There's a snap ring that's got to come out. This piece comes off, and then put the ring gear on, put that back on, torque the ring gear bolts, then put your carrier bearing on, because you can't get this off with the carrier bearings on. If you don't have the right puller, like I do, to be able to pull these off and on real easy, that sucks. One other good tip: look at your hardware that comes in your install kit. Some of these Chinese install kits just come with terrible hardware, and make the decision whether you're going to use the old bolts or new stuff. This was a Yukon install kit that came with this, so the hardware looks pretty good, it's decent, so I'm going to use the new bolts, red Loctite, and put it together. Alright, let's get the ring gear off here. Give this a quick clean. It's level, get all the gear oil off of it. Yeah, so you can't jam this on here at all, and you want to be real careful. These have just the tiniest little TIG weld that holds these fingers on, and of course these wires, so you got to be real. You don't want to be slamming this all around. And, so let's get the right screwdriver pick to just pop that circlip off and pull this unit out and install the ring gear. There we go. Just grab the edge, and then this should just pop off like a slinky. There we go. Set that aside. And then be very careful. Observe the orientation. There's pins and stuff that need to line up the same way when you put it on. So let's just do this. Get our ring gear on. That's how she goes. Let's get this clip back on. Being very careful with this wire. Let's flip it upside down. Line up our ring gear. I'm just going to stick 2 of these bolts in, and then I'll put Loctite on the rest of them. You guys want to hear that change in pitch when you're tapping a bearing on? I like to take a chisel, make sure it's finally seated. Obviously you got to take care of the bearing cage that you're not banging on any of that and bending stuff up, but we're good here. Nicely seated. Race on, always taking care of all this stuff. You can use a press or whatever you got. I just pound them on. I've never had an issue. Alright, this is ready to install. So let's take a look at what shims we got and throw it in for the first time. Alright, let's get this Eaton E locker put in for the first time. Looking at the factory shims, we had 125 on the left and 127 thousandths on the right. So I like to use these original ones first as your first try. If you can't bang it in, then obviously you got to make adjustments. But I really don't like the ones that come in most of the install kits where they're two halves and a bunch shoved in there in between. I've seen more often than not in service when I get diffs that, you know, the shims are hanging out and stuff. Just so I actually have a lot of these that I always save from Jeeps. So I try, if I can, if I got to change these out, to still use the factory style thick one-piece shims. It's the best way to go, least amount of problems. But let's slap these in, throw them in, and see where we're at. If we're loose or we're too tight on Backlash, or we got to move it or change our carrier preload to get that right. But let's always start with what you got, and I mean it should be close, within 5 or 10 thousandths, the way aftermarket stuff is built today. So let's get it in. Again, be real careful, all these wires and these tabs. This thing just rides and clicks around the bearing carrier. That's always got to be loose and free. So another good tip, I have a special chisel that I have ground a nice round edge into for pounding these shims in, and that way you're not going to peen them over and minimize the amount of damage that you're going to do to them. And again, you would never do this if it was those aftermarket ones where it's the two-piece with a bunch of junk in the middle. They just suck. Put our bearing caps on, making careful, of course, you don't mess up the locker at all. This should always have a nice little play. Watch this wire, because you might have to have this thing in and out, you know, half a dozen times. That's tight right now, which I don't like. So I'm going to end up bending or making sure that those are okay. It looks like that one needs to be bent a little bit. They get banged up in the boxes. So right now that's not loose, so we'll have to fix that next time around. But so Backlash is like just barely there. I bet it's like 2 or 3, so we're gonna end up having to move that carrier just a hair that way. Yeah, it's like 1.5. So all right, let's move her over and see if we can deal with what's going on here. Leave that one in. But tapping on that tiny little bit will make that okay. This one too. So I just opened that. They probably just moved when they welded it. I've had to do this a dozen times on these lockers. It's the same thing. They just have an issue, but no problem. This needs to move free, or the locker is going to be agitated when you're trying to open and shut it. There we go. That's the trick. These are just, you know, obviously don't jam something in there a lot, but you can use these side holes to pry the carrier out a little bit. Just gotta be careful. Stick our shims so we don't lose. I'm just gonna leave this thing sitting right there. I'm gonna remeasure these and then make an adjustment to move this over just a little bit. So I got 126 and 128. Sometimes you get lucky, you can change them, but we need more here. So I'm gonna look for a couple different ones of these, see what I got in my parts. All right, I got a 121 and I think it's like a 130. So we went down about, basically just shifted, put more here and less here. So we had a 125 and a 128. So we're going up like 3 here and down 3 here. And just basically move the carrier over 3 thousandths to open up the backlash. And probably not really change the preload. It should be still within range. So let's get this thing in here. See? Now we got, open that up. Let's make sure this is okay. Put the caps on, check the backlash again. See how this moves now? Because I bent those little tabs up. That's what you want. I don't know. That's 6.5, almost 7. So we're gonna call that good, proper, same setup. So these gears should live on, no problem. All right, let's get this out of the way. All right, let's move on. We gotta kind of eyeball and drill a hole here for this wire to go through, and then put the axle back together and move on to the ball joints, and then do the wiring. I think for this thing, the manual says use a 1/2 inch hole for this. Sometimes you can, like I like to do it like the Rubicons are done at the top. That's what this little boss, well, I guess it wouldn't be a Rubicon, but there's a nice little boss there, but there's like no room to get anything in there. I guess I could get a right angle air drill, but this one I'm gonna try going in from the side right here. So let's pull this out so we don't get any chips or anything in there. But there should be more than enough room for this wire to go around and get the carrier bearing cap back in. So pull that out and I'll drill a hole and get her back in. Last step on this unibit's a 1/2 inch. So put a little grease on the inner axle seals. Just help them out. $60 foot-pounds on the carrier bearing caps. Just ready for the cover. Now, normally I'm not a fan of these paper gaskets. I just RTV it, but you look at that. This is Performance Materials, made in USA. So I guess I'm just gonna put a little gear oil on these and install them and see how they look. That's what the guy wanted. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap this video up here. You know how to put back together the axle and torque everything down, fill it up with gear oil if you made it this far. You'll also have to follow Eaton's installation manual on how to pull the electrical, get that all wired into the cab for your switch, for your locker. I got a couple other things that I got to do on this Jeep, so I'm going to start on that and get that all wrapped up. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, hit it. And that'll help me out with the channel and keep the videos coming. Thanks for watching, guys.